Welcome to Ditch the Nerves, Toastmasters District 91 podcast. I am Rekha Matthew, your host for this episode. Today's guest is a software engineer turned world champion in public speaking and a two times TEDx speaker. In 2022, he made history as the youngest ever to win the title of World Championship of Public Speaking. Today, he runs his own coaching company, helping leaders communicate with clarity, confidence, and impact. Please join me in welcoming Cyril Junior Dim to our podcast. Cyril, it is such an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I had a little bit of reading before the podcast and I read some really fascinating things about your childhood and your upbringing. So it was really interesting to hear that you grew up in a family where your mother was an actress and your aunt was a runway model in Miami.
That's
So
right.
that sounds very fascinating. And I believe some of that aspects might have influenced heavily on your childhood. Getting on stage and speaking might have come really easily and as almost second nature to you, I'm imagining. So I would love to start from that point of your childhood where what was it the thing that you saw and you were inspired by that has had the biggest impact on you as a speaker today?
All right. Thank you for starting there. I think that's really the heart of my story. My mother and my father are farmers. We're simple people. But I watched firsthand as confidence opened the door for my parents because they really needed to negotiate their way through life in order to get opportunities, in order to get us opportunities. And it was really emphasized to us in the household growing up that we needed to be sure of ourselves, that we needed to speak clearly, speak confidently, stand up straight when you're talking. And, when we were back there, it felt like such a burden. Come on. And there's always the temptation to be shy, to go with the flow. But when I saw it opening doors for my parents first, and when I saw that confidence opening doors for me, I started to realize that there is lots to be gained from learning how to present yourself with confidence. And that became a driving force throughout my life and throughout my career.
So, were you as a child someone who would volunteer to stand in front of the stage, probably make a nice speech in front of your relatives, given that encouragement from everyone that probably has had that unconsciously placed a seed in your mind that you could potentially be this person out there performing and speaking in front of thousands of people?
Yeah, I love that question because I feel like the answer is yes and no. I'm an introvert and I've been an introvert my whole life. So left to my own devices, I hated the idea of interacting, but I'm also really competitive. And so the influence would always be, look, the other kids could do it and they're doing it well. What do they have that I don't? And because of that, I'd find myself diving headfirst into things that I was barely prepared for. And once I was in the mix, I'd have to figure my way out. And I feel the experience of doing that, going in, not knowing what to do and finding my way out, it gave me confidence that I could. I'm sure it morphed its way into the career that I have now. When you say speaking to thousands of people, even now it amazes me that from learning to be confident as a kid, I get to do that as a career now because the connection wasn't so clear growing up, I really appreciate that early exposure that I have and those tiny personality traits that got me in the right kind of trouble because, well, as you said, this is what I do for a living now and I get to support others to do that as well.
Amazing. Would you say you have ever encountered imposter syndrome or underconfidence in front of people, or is it a challenge that you had ever had to overcome? Or do you think that you had bigger battles to face or other sort of demons to fight with?
Oh, yes, without a doubt. If I'll let you in on something, even now I struggle with imposter syndrome because I've had this haunting feeling of, okay, you got the world championship, now what? You get a company that comes to you and says, could you come and train our employees to do ABC? Now in my heart, I know I've been doing this for years. I know I can run a training, but I find myself saying, but what can I give them that's special? Maybe I'm not the right person for it. And these are thoughts that I have to fight off every day of my career, even, that I belong, that I earned what I have in life. But to take it back and wonder if I had the same feelings growing up, maybe not as much as I have it right now. Because of course, when I was younger, the stakes were lower and there was less to lose. So maybe I didn't think so much about whether or not I belonged. When I started competing and entering public speaking contests, yeah, it happened a few times that I would reach the finals and then look at the other finalists and be like, because you'd be there in the finals and everybody else is from a private school. And I'd start comparing myself and feeling like I don't belong. So I feel like it's natural. It's followed me around. I'm trying to accept it, but I still fight it even today.
Interesting. I wouldn't have imagined you would have those things that you were facing, but yeah, thanks for sharing that. You have studied, or at least in university, done a computer science degree.
That's right.
And you have interestingly pivoted into the world of public speaking. So I'm really interested to know, was there a specific point in your career that made you realize that you're probably not meant to be coding in cubicles, but rather being on stage and speaking and inspiring others? Was there a specific moment you remember?
Yes, every time I got fired.
Okay.
The thing is, I got into IT because those are my uncles. They're pretty cool and they're tech guys. And I do have a knack for technologies. I'm a bit of a geek in that regard. But to your previous question, could there have been moments of imposter syndrome, of looking at people who have IT in their blood, who have coding in their blood, and comparing myself to them and realizing I could never be the best? There were moments like that for sure. And perhaps that competitive edge that I mentioned from my childhood, it would come back. And it would say, what do they have that I don't? And I'd say, oh, intelligence for one. They love this. They had their first computer when they were 4. And I started looking within myself for, okay, what did I have since I was 4 or 3? A, B, what do I love doing? C, what can I help others to do? And at that point, every time I get fired, I'd have managers saying to me, well, you're an excellent communicator. You're an excellent speaker. I don't know if you've ever thought about being they always say for some reason, a motivational speaker. I think you would be great in that regard. And I'd be there sneering and thinking, yeah, just give me my severance package. But in my heart, I knew they were telling the truth. I knew that every moment I spent away from the stage, away from the art, I knew I was stealing. And my conscience kind of haunted me for that. So I thought, why not make the dive? Now that's the scary part, right? Making the dive, leaving a safe, guaranteed paycheck for a not so guaranteed paycheck that is directly tied to the value you bring. Scariest thing I've ever done. And well, the most transformative thing I've ever done at the same time.
Yeah, and that probably, I would imagine, gives you an advantage because you can now go back to the same corporate environments because you have been there and you can see the sort of struggles probably managers or leaders face in such a setting and help them with whatever that you could help them out with. So
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, there's a reason they have that stereotype of the IT guy. You know, we think of the IT guy as a basement dweller. You know, wearing a hoodie, not talking to people very much. Now, although that stereotype is not entirely true, it does have its origins. And in the industry, you do notice there's a need for the people that are client-facing, for the people that are leading teams. And if those people are trained in how to present themselves, we call those soft skills. It's not just public speaking, but how to communicate effectively, clearly. You find that companies that invest more in those skills have greater stakeholder engagement and stronger relationships with their clients. Now, who doesn't want that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, coming to your 2022 World Championship speech, obviously you worked all the way through different levels to reach there, competing against thousands of people and hundreds of clubs. And you finally became the world champion in public speaking in 2022. And not just that, you made history as the youngest speaker to win that title, which is so incredible.
Thank you.
So obviously, you have cracked something which many people of your age did not crack. And I would love to know from your point of view, what really makes a speech a winning speech and what separates it from a good speech or an okay speech? What is that? What is the magic formula to a winning
Now,
speech?
thank you for that. Really, I think that's a really important question. I think also the answer might seem counterintuitive at first, but it's been my material experience that it's not the speech, It's the speaker. Because if the speaker is aligned on what matters, if the speaker is aligned on what the audience or what an audience needs, they know what to prepare. When I was working towards the World Championship speech, my goal was not to have a World Championship speech, because in reality, that's 14 minutes of content, 2 speeches, and then what? My goal was to be a World Championship speaker. That is to say, with my training, I can always put together a speech that ranks globally. How did I do that in practice? The first thing I would try to understand is how my problem or my experience or my story has universal value. Because if the audience can't relate to what you're talking about, they have no reason to emotionally invest. They need to see themselves in what you're talking about. Only then do they start to nod, do they start to agree. Only then do they stop looking at all the imperfections of your speech, which is another interesting story I'll tell you later on. So I really needed to stop and think about the universal value of what I'm talking about, and whether people would be able to listen in and say, me too, or at the very least, I know what that's like. When that's done, it became a question of wordsmithing, because even though the idea is solid, the way you say it and your choice of words affects everything. Now, in order to achieve that, I had to have a few more brushes with literature. Love literature, love reading. I've had several strong literary influences in my life, going back all the way to my teachers. But that taught me that if you put the words together just the right way, you can hit hearts. You know, most of us can think back to words that were said to us so concisely that we never forgot them. That word combination matters. And when that's done, it's all about, well, I don't want to minimize it to just rehearsing, but I want to say testing out your content in front of diverse audiences. Because even though I was aiming for a Toastmasters championship, I wanted an international speech, which is to say anybody from any walk of life should be able to consume the speech and understand why it won. So put these 3 things together and suddenly you see that the speech you put together and field in front of a judge, it tends to do well. In the best case scenario, it ranks globally.
I love that. And the bit which you spoke, I would love the second bit, which is the wording. You said a specific word, which is wordsmithing, or
Yes.
that is so fascinating, and I would love to get a bit into that if you don't mind.
Of course.
You did mention something about going back into literature, reading, and getting inspired by literature. How does that really look like in when you're creating a speech? Do you go back to your mentors, asking them for inspiration or for some feedback, or how does the process look like?
Brilliant. So the essence of that idea of wordsmithing, it comes off the fact that you're time boxed. You have 7 minutes to get the point across, which means whatever value you're trying to get across, it would serve you best if you could say it in as few words as possible. And this has been proven at least twice, where the World Championship speech had around 500 words. I believe Ramona J. Smith had about 500 words. Pres Vasilev had about 500 words as well. It really reinforces that principle. Time box, have to say it in as few words as possible. So I would go to my mentors and I would ask, is this wordy? Am I beating a dead horse? Has this point been made already such that I don't need to keep repeating it? I think that's the easiest thing to find first, the repetitions. The next thing you're looking for, if you're so fortunate, are the poetic opportunities, where you find a line that you can play with. It sounds neater when you're saying it. I've listened to one line, for example, where a speaker says, as I was dragging 2 suitcases through the streets, I thought of my parents dragging 2 children through life. Now you think of a speech that's got those lines, people stop and they're like, You want that reaction out of the audience. So you're looking for opportunities to do that. You're really looking for opportunities to do that. And then the last thing you're looking for, because you know who your audience is the clarity. Fine, I've put together a really well-packed choice of words and I've played with the language. It's flowery, but are they going to get it? I live in Poland, where English is not the first language. So immediately I have to make sure that my language is not too deep so as to inhibit understanding. And it's been to the point sometimes that I intentionally speak broken English so that my audience gets it. And so that's the level of deliberateness that you want to approach your speech with. The higher you go in the contest, the more deliberate these guys are. Every word seems to be planned, and well, it's to be expected in a world championship contest. So, this is what I mean when I talk about wordsmithing. Of course, it's easier to see opportunities to do this if you're well read, if you dabble in a novel and so forth. It really teaches you how to build narratives. But having people that can look at your speech, your choice of words, and make comments, it goes a long way towards ensuring that your choice of words at the highest level is deliberate.
Thanks for sharing that. I loved it. Now, you said that you have been part of Toastmasters for 8 years, and
That's
obviously
right.
in these 8 years, I'm imagining you have Toastmasters meeting every week or every other week, which means you probably must have delivered hundreds of speeches. How do you make sure like all of the speeches have universal value? Is it like you pick and choose some, or you sort of like modify the speech to make it have a universal value? Because I'm imagining after a point of time, wouldn't you go out of topics to talk about? How do you like find inspiration or the passion to speak after you have spoken about everything that has happened in your life, probably?
I hear you. I hear you. I'm going to draw on the wisdom of another world champion, Darren Lacroix, who says, "You don't have to climb Mount Everest to give a good speech." I think sometimes we put a pressure on ourselves when we say universal value. We want to cure cancer or something like that. Universal value could be as simple as look both ways before you cross the street. There is really nothing short of a new invention, nothing that we are ever going to say as speakers that has not been said before by someone somewhere. Our task as speakers is to frame it through our individual lens, how this knowledge has impacted us, and then either give it as a suggestion or a reminder. Many times what we're giving are reminders. Our audience knows what we're saying, but the reminder framed through the experience of Cyril, who I see every week, it becomes more personal and therefore it becomes more valuable to them. How have I strived to give universal value each week? I have freed myself of the need to give a new groundbreaking speech each time, because it's not going to happen. And you're not always going to give a good speech. And sometimes, yes, I still forget my lines. But when I appreciate the beauty and value that can be found in a simple thought, smile, say thank you, be a good friend, you start to enjoy every speech you make, because even if it's not groundbreaking, it's still a reminder. And that's where the value is.
Keep it simple
Keep it simple.
and bring your experience in it to make connect with the audience, I would say.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, watching your World Championship speech, Dini, I couldn't help but notice how articulate you are with your words, and you have such a good voice modulation that makes the message so impactful and engaging with the audience. Now, is this something with your voice and your pace, which is very peculiar, I would say? Is that something that again has been inspired from your childhood, looking at performing arts? You're inspired by your family, that sort of a thing? Or have you received specific vocal training to be able to do that?
Thank you. First of all, I'm humbled to hear this. My siblings would argue that my voice is the most annoying thing they've ever heard, but I'm going to go with your take on this one. If I could think back to something that definitely influenced my articulation, it was illustrative reading. And this is also something that didn't happen deliberately, it happened by chance as well. Now, I take you back to a Zimbabwean classroom where we have to study English or English literature. There are 40 of us sitting there and maybe 5 textbooks. So what would happen is we need someone to volunteer to read the textbook or to read the passage out loud so that everybody knows the material for the day. And back to your question of was I always volunteering? Well, this is one of the few times where I would volunteer. Not because I wanted to, but because if you're the reader, you're guaranteed to have a book. So I was being expedient and I would have to read the passages, but not just that, I would have to bring them to life, especially when we were doing English literature. You can imagine we're reading Great Expectations. It's a thick book for an O-level student. You have to bring it to life so that the students understand and they can engage. And that became my first training. Nobody ever told me to do it. I just felt as though it would be fair for the other students to hear it as though it were an audiobook. That was the era of audiobooks, and I was trying to be like an audiobook reader. And it slowly became a habit. which is why now in training, one of my fondest recommendations to my clients is if you ever do some reading daily, be it an email, be it a book, anything that you have to read the first paragraph out loud and read it with life. Do it every day for as long as you can. It slowly becomes habit, and that habit affects the way you articulate yourself. Now, of course, through public speaking training, through working with coaches, through becoming a Toastmaster and getting a better understanding of vocal variety, I did improve the way I articulate myself. But my earliest lesson in good modulation and playing with my voice would have been a classroom in Zimbabwe where I had to read a textbook for a group of 40.
Amazing. And something that you probably didn't even intend to develop ended up being your greatest superpower and your strength when it came to delivering speeches. That's such
Right
amazing.
place at the right time.
Amazing. And that brings us to our next question, which is on Toastmasters, which you likely touched upon, on how that sort of learning or in-depth sort of pathways through Toastmasters, be it through voice modulation, understanding the different types of voice modulations, varying from volumes, pitch, tone, everything really matters, right? So what are some of your learnings from Toastmasters that you would say that you have taken and have incorporated in your professional life? It's speaking with leaders or teaching them. How does that really play out in the real world?
Right. My most useful observation, at least for me in my career, was that high and fast are easy. You tell people vocal variety and they think raise your voice sometimes or go faster. Very easy. Low and slow, much harder. You tell people bring your voice down to emphasize it. That's uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable for people. Slow it down, almost to a staccato, one word after the other, or dead stop, don't say anything, and people freak out. It's so unnatural. But I found that's where the greatest impact is. Those people who are comfortable coming down in tempo, they seem to be more in control. Those people who can come to a dead stop, oh, goodness me, they seem like demigods. And so I've started to help people to find opportunities to apply the lows and the slows because they don't come naturally for everybody. And I always try to include them in my preparations. In fact, recently I caught myself scripting in the silence. I was thinking, after this moment, I'm going to have a long, pregnant silence where people think about what I said. And I really appreciated the growth it has taken to come to that point. So when it comes to playing with our voices, this has been the biggest observation that I made. And it's the awareness I want to instill in the people that I work with. You're doing great when it comes to going up in volume, when it comes to speaking faster because you're excited, you want to say it all that. You're doing great. On the opposite end, bringing it low and slow, if you can master those, you are never the same speaker again. You get people coming to you afterwards and saying, I don't know what it was. It was just different. That's what you're aiming for because it's about being in control. And sometimes being in control means demonstrating calm because nothing is threatening my control. And I enjoy sharing that as a learning outcome for the people I work with.
Amazing. And that was clearly demonstrated in your speeches that I've seen, both your TEDx speech as well as your World Championship speech. I specifically remember a certain point where before you started the speech, you said, thank you, contest chair. And there was like this a few seconds of staring at the contest chair. I was like, what's going on? That felt odd to me. But you are so used to, you understand the importance of it. And I'm sure it was intentional and there was a purpose to it, which I later understood that you had taken a bit of his or her sort of inspiration into the story and sort of molded it together, which made sense later. So
Absolutely.
very much demonstrated in the speech and something for everyone to start being comfortable with and play around with. And yeah, going low and slow is
That's
important,
right.
as important. So coming to our last few questions for our listeners specifically who are listening to this podcast and who are probably stuck in their technical roles in a corporate environment and who want to speak up and get into high impact leadership positions but are unable to do that. What advice would you like to give for them to sort of come out of it and help them grow in their career as leaders?
Thank you so much for that question. And I'm not going to mince my words here. There's plenty of public speaking advice out there, plenty that I could give perhaps. Awareness is the first step. Knowing what you need, knowing what you're missing, that's the first step, because only then can you start to cherry pick which remedies work for you. And we've actually done some research to that end to support people to better understand what they need as it concerns their communication. It's a simple test that people can take on their social media. If you find me on Instagram, it's Cyril Junior Dim. This test only runs on Instagram. And if you write me the word type or archetype, it launches an automatic series of questions that helps to map out what matters to you as a speaker. And with that, you get a free workbook that includes all the strategies, absolutely free, that you can start to employ immediately. But I thought as well, to your point, that over the years, there's definitely been some more universal strategies that have changed my career and that could change a career. And we've also done research on that front. For the first time, we've made it all digitally available. You can also find it at the link in my bio on Instagram. It's 4 deep dive resources, and a few of them apply specifically to corporate environments, because perhaps you don't need to make a contest speech, but you still need to know how to make a solid, convincing presentation. For people in corporate environments, I find that speaking on the spot, improvise without a lot of prior preparation, sometimes it makes all the difference. It inspires confidence in those that you're listening to. By now you see I've already picked 2 of my favorite deep dive resources. But that's to say, if you spend time going over these resources, you can start to develop habits that complement your awareness. And that's what creates a good speaker, a good communicator. It's all a series of habits. Even the parts that we call bad communication are merely habits. And if we can consciously work to cultivate good habits through awareness, we can all become powerful communicators.
Being aware and creating good habits out of the awareness that you have built takes you a long way.
Absolutely.
If you could go back to your younger self, if you had to deliver like a keynote speech, imagine standing on the TEDx page and little Cyril sitting on the front seat, looking into the world with your glowing eyes. What advice would you give, and what would that be?
Start. Just start. I feel my career would have been further along if I had stopped doubting myself, if I had stopped wanting to find a safe option first. And it's my material experience that there are people out there, and this applies for everybody, universal value. There's people out there who get more than you in exposure, in income, in opportunities, even though they know less than you. And that's not a knock on them. If anything, that shows they have the courage to ask, to just start. The worst thing that could happen is they say no. The worst thing that could happen is you forget your lines. It won't kill you. If I could talk to my younger self, I would encourage myself to start, and I feel my career would have been further along for it. To your earlier question, sometimes you asked if there's anything that haunts me. Sometimes it's this. It's knowing that I've been doing this quietly for nearly 15 years. Only now have I had the confidence to say to the world, look, I have something to say on the subject. I should have started.
Amazing. And yeah, I think to the point which you had started off with in the podcast, where before we actually recorded the podcast, you were mentioning about you working with younger children and helping them with inculcating certain skills. Could you share a bit about that journey in terms of how you're giving back to the community, and where do you find the biggest joy in the
Absolutely.
work that you do currently?
Thank you for that. That work I'm really proud of, because when I became the world champion, I made a promise that I would make the coaching I wish I had when I was young available to the kids of Africa, where I'm from. 2025, early 2025, I took a trip back to Zimbabwe to engage with the student body there. I was only able to reach 5 schools, and I say only because I feel that the work there is not done and the talent there is immense. So that's one way I started. You asked what I'm most proud of, and I'd like to tell you a story of a young man in Uganda. His name is Churchill, and he and we started talking, I guess, before I became the world champion even. He was a high school student then, and he was asking for advice on how he could give a better speech. Forget the trophies, because he's got many of them. He started an initiative known as Friends of Churchill in Uganda, where he trains young kids on how to speak confidently. And when I say young, I mean, first grade, second grade sometimes. You'll see his videos on Instagram, on TikTok, encouraging them, speak up. Now say it with emotion. Now say it like you're angry. Now say it like you're sad. It's exactly what I wish I had growing up. And here it is, out of the mouth of a young man to an entire country. And I'm so humbled to even know him. And I know the sky is the limit, and I'm happy to be a part of the story. But to know that people are watching back home and I'm able to interact with them, and who knows what could start. Friends of Churchill started because Churchill and we started talking online, and it happened, and now it's helping hundreds of kids across Uganda. All of this has been, it reminds me why I do what I do. It reminds me what really matters in my job. It's not the corporate gigs that put the food on the table. Do appreciate those. They're plenty of fun. It's really those who wish they had access to world-class coaching. Those who are saying, I promise, if I only have the access, I do incredible things. And that's what I'm seeing in these kids out of Zimbabwe, out of South Africa, out of Uganda, I believe 2 out of Nigeria, and a couple in Zambia and Malawi that I've had the great joy of working with. This is why we do what we do.
Oh, that sounds so nice to hear that you're leaving a mark in the world. So, last final question, since you said you're very much into literature and reading, I would imagine if there's like any quote or a book that you would like to share that has influenced you tremendously as a speaker, anything that you would like to share?
A book that influenced me a lot personally was The Namesake. It was written by Jhumpa Lahiri. I believe she's Indian or from Sri Lanka. The Namesake is a story of identity. Now, immediately, Ndini was a speech about identity. So that's a very precious book to me because the protagonist asks all the questions that I've asked. Who am I? Where am I from? What name, what nickname should I accept? What traditions should I embody? That's a novel, good reading. I believe there's a movie on it as well, The Namesake, written by Jhumpa Lahiri. Of course, when it concerns self-development, there's a good many reads. A good classic, of course, is Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That book really teaches you how to think like an audience member. Remember? Universal value. That book teaches you what is universally valuable to people that you talk to, and I like it very much for that. If I could think of another one, it would have to be Storyworthy by Matthew Dix. That helps you in building and crafting stories. It teaches storytelling from a moth perspective because he takes part in the moth. And very human, very relatable, very practical. It's hands-on. You could pick it up immediately and you could learn how to tell a good story. My book is still on the way, so yeah, when my book comes out, read my book as well. It will change your life, I promise.
For sure, I wouldn't be any doubtful about that.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing all of that. There are some of them obviously I've not read and not heard about, so would love to get my hands on some of those. So thank you so much for sharing.
Absolutely.
That brings us to the end of the podcast. So thank you so much for joining us today. I absolutely loved the conversation. And I think you touched upon so many different powerful topics, including leadership, communication, public speaking, but what really touched my heart is the sort of impact that you have and difference that you make to young kids that you want to give back to the community and leave a mark in this world on the back of your own achievements.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for sharing all of that journey, and we look forward to seeing all of the amazing things you continue to do within and outside Toastmasters.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. Please follow the journey with me. I'm active on all social media. Cyril Junior Dim. I'm an easy find, and I'd be happy to exchange stories and meet people from District 91, you said,
Yes, yeah.
and hear how you guys are changing the world. I love hearing a good story and connecting with people from all over the world. So please stay in touch and let's enjoy this journey together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who has joined us today to listen to the podcast. We hope to see you in our next episode. Until then, keep calm and ditch the nerves.